All right, everybody, happy Wednesday. First Wednesday training in December of this year. Hope you are bearing the cold okay. Wanted to thank Adam DeRula, who originated this thought, and also Cassie, who's on here, which dovetailed out of a training a couple weeks ago, which is how do appraisals differ based on what loan a buyer is using? Right? So conventional, how is it different? FHA, how is it different? VA, how is it different? Not going to get super into USDA today, but those three main horses all have some quirks in terms of how the appraisal plays into the loan approval process. We've got Matt, we've got Brad in the house in Edina. So whether you're on here or in the training room, feel free to jump in with questions and we'll get moving on this. So I wanted to start with disputing appraisals and how that changes, and then we'll get into the condition of the property and common work orders that are required in order to make sure that an appraisal is sufficient depending on loan type. Okay, so we'll start with low appraisals and then we'll move into work orders. First of all, appraisals with FHA is unique in that an FHA appraisal will stay with the property for 180 days, which is roughly 6 months from the effective date of the appraisal report, right? Anybody on here had a low FHA appraisal before?
Yeah.
A lot of people, right? It's a common thing. And so typically those are the hardest to overturn with comps, right? You say, hey, look, I think we should have considered properties A, B, and C, and that the value would be different if we considered those properties, right? But the appraiser has already drawn a line in the sand and established a value, right? Not saying it's impossible to overturn them, but it is somewhat challenging. Remember, when you get into a low appraisal situation as a buyer's agent, you do have some more leverage because the appraisal stays with the property. So if you think about that, hey, we didn't get the full value of the purchase agreement. We listed at 350, we accepted at 360, and we got 340 out of the appraisal, right? We're just going to throw it back on the market. We're not interested in negotiating this $20,000 delta between purchase price and appraised value. Well, that's great, but please understand, Mr. or Ms. Listing Agent, that you are not going to be able to grab another FHA buyer and get 360 out of it, right? Because as soon as that new FHA buyer that might have agreed to a certain purchase price comes in, the FHA case number, which is associated with the property, will say, oh, we already have an appraisal done on this property at 340,000. So we don't care what your new purchase agreement says. We care about the appraisal that was already done on the property. Does that make sense? Anybody have dealt with that before? Or a listing agent trying to get crafty or not understanding?
Colin, I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say you have a buyer and they get an appraisal, which comes in at, let's say, 360. All of a sudden, you switch lenders, have to get a new appraisal, and their appraisal comes in at 340. Are we talking then they're probably unconventional, I'm guessing?
Repeat it one more time. I think I understand, but I want to make sure I do, Josh.
Okay. Buyer goes in on a property. They already got the appraisal done. It's at 360. Now, circumstances happen. They switch lenders, have to get a new appraisal with the new lender, and that appraisal now is 340.
Okay, so when you talk about appraisal transfers, let's stick with FHA for now, right? So let's say that you have a buyer that goes in, says, "Hey, I got an appraisal, an FHA appraisal at 360,000, but now I started over here with a different lender, and now I realize that brokers have significantly better pricing on FHA and VA products, and so now I'm going to come over and work with Flex." You would have the appraisal transfer to the new lender if it's FHA or VA, right? Because
Got it.
those appraisals will stick with the property. So you can transfer the appraisal. Now, the old lender may not be super thrilled about that. They might want to get paid for the appraisal first. Um, but FHA is the easiest lender to lender transfer. Then VA is a little unique, but also somewhat easy. And then conventional will accept appraisal transfers all day long. It's more that retail lenders have a hard time accepting an appraisal that's done by Flex Mortgage or Rocket Mortgage, or they will say, no, we want our own appraisal done on this property. So the government loans, FHA, VA, very easy, conventional a little more tricky. Does that add some color and answer your question?
Yep, for sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So conventional, we'll touch on this for a second. Conventional appraisals do not stick with the property, but to Josh's point, the lender can't order a new appraisal unless there are significantly glaring issues. I have dealt with a handful of listing agents, as anybody said, let's just get a new appraisal. I'll pay for it, right? I've heard that many, many times. It doesn't work that way. Like when Brad and I worked at Bell and we had a low appraisal, there's nothing we can do about it, right? We're stuck with it. We can challenge it and provide comps and say, look, we want the value to be X because we think these comps support it. But at the end of the day, you know, a retail lender is not just going to go order up a new
Let's go
appraisal.
to 7520, which is I think is the next.
So that's one advantage in the broker space where we have had issues. And Matt, I want you to speak to this a little bit. Um, we have had issues where an appraisal's come in low with a lender that we're working with, and we have restarted the loan elsewhere, ordered a new conventional appraisal with a new lender, and received the value that we need. Right, Matt? Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, we've done it a couple. I've done it a couple of times personally, a handful. And yeah, I mean, it's communication with the listing agent as well. Obviously, they want that price to go up. This was at a time, up until recently, where it was tough to get homes under contract. But um, yeah, I mean, it was basically that simple. We did have one where the sellers agreed to pay for the appraisal, so we switched lenders on our side. We had an addendum drawn up saying that the sellers would cover the second appraisal, and we ended up getting value. Sellers covered the appraisal and moved forward. And I trying to think if I've had one that did not. No, I think all three, four of them value did go up. But I
So
mean, again, the thing of that is we got to make sure that we have enough time. That's where the communication comes in as well. Um, you know, with conventional, typically we get to see when the order is due. We can try to rush it as well, but again, that's going to cost more money. So when it comes to this scenario, it's important that the communication on all sides knows what's going on and knows, a potential delay for any of it. The other thing too that we have to worry about in the rate market that we're in, I think both times we got lucky, but I mean, a buyer could be locked in at 6.5. We have to flip it over in 3 weeks, and all of a sudden we're at 7. So that's something we have to make sure that the buyers, either the seller covers the rate buy down or what it might be. There's a lot of moving pieces that we have to look at when it comes to switching lenders because of a low appraisal and who's initiating that.
So we got VA, we got FHA, we got conventional, and then VA. So VA tends to be the most complex, but also the most friendly, in my opinion, process for disputing or challenging appraised value. All right. There are actually two parts of the VA appraisal dispute process. There's the Tidewater process, which is where the appraiser, before they say, hey, here's the appraised value, they will wave their hands and say, hey, I know I've got a purchase agreement here at 360. I'm not seeing any comps that support 360. Agents, help me, right? And that is helpful because they are asking you for help before they've established a low value, right? And then even if they do say, yeah, you know what? I mean, I like your comps, Jennifer, but I'm just not getting there. I'm going to submit the appraisal at 350. There is a reconsideration of value process where the staff appraisal review will allow you to challenge the appraisal even after the report's been submitted. So what does the Tidewater process look like? Well, it's pretty easy. We order a VA appraisal, and the appraiser says, hey there, I'm issuing Tidewater, which is their way of saying, I'm not seeing the value here. This is ripped right out of an email. Josh, this is on Christofferson, if you remember that.
Just
Uh,
seen them this weekend with a pie.
oh, there you go. There you go. The VA appraiser has issued a Tidewater notice. If you're not familiar, this is the VA appraiser asking for comps that support our purchase price. Please provide your 3 best closed comps with full MLS PDFs. This must be done in 24 hours. Let us know if you need help. Okay. So what ended up happening is Josh submitted some comps. The listing agent submitted some comps. Those comps were sent to the appraiser, and the appraiser came back and said, yes, we see the value out of it. Now, does it work every time? No, but it is a great tool for you to A, show off your market knowledge, B, work for your client, and C, collaborate with the listing agent to hold the deal together. Does that make sense? Anybody been through this Tidewater process other than Josh, or some feedback on this? Okay. So even if they say, yeah, Josh, your comps suck. We're not going to roll with that, and we're going to appraise this low. You know, there is an ROV involving the following steps. Number one, review the appraisal report to identify any errors, discrepancies, or missed details. Number two, gather supporting evidence, right? So this is strong supporting evidence that can include comps or market trends or any updates, unique features that you feel the original VA appraiser may have overlooked. And then a well-crafted letter. Think about David and the team meeting yesterday. ChatGPT is your friend, clearly explaining your concerns and presenting your supporting evidence, right? And then you submit this request to the appropriate department or entity handling the ROV process. Now, it might depend on how far apart you are in value, right? And Cassie, maybe jump in here. If you appraise at 355 and you've got a purchase price at 360, that's probably a lot easier to work out. Maybe you don't have to go through this ROV process, depending on how malleable and understanding the buyers and sellers are. But if you're at 360 and you appraise at 340, $20,000 makes up a significant difference. So any questions about how you will see changes in disputing appraisals across these different loan types? All right, all good. Let's get into the nitty-gritty, which is the work orders. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about minimum property standards, right? Uh, when an appraisal is done, a lot of people will confuse them with home inspections, right? Which an appraisal is not a home inspection. But an appraiser will look for minimum property standards that are required in order for the appraisal to meet guidelines depending on the type of loan, right? So let's cover some of these minimum property standards. Number one, you have to understand that appraisal standards will differ depending on loan type, right? Conventional loan is private, They have property requirements that are set by Fannie and Freddie, and these requirements tend to be relatively flexible, certainly in comparison to FHA and VA, right? FHA, we all know chipping and peeling paint. We're going to get to a handful of things to look out for, but FHA is typically stricter, as is VA. This prevents the buyer from taking on more work than they are able to handle. And it also protects the government from, hey, we guaranteed a loan, FHA, VA, USDA, whatever. The borrower defaulted and now we're stuck with the property, right? So those are the two main reasons why FHA is a little bit more stringent or picky, depending on what adjective you want to use, about minimum property standards and appraisal work orders. One thing I want to cover is that regardless of loan type, the thing to remember is that conventional is not a safe haven against all appraisal issues. And as is property is not, something that absolves you from, oh, we got a conventional offer, so we're good. Well, no. And I would say the three things to remember in this regard are safety, soundness, and security, right? Anything that is a safety issue, and we're seeing appraisers start to get more picky on this. It used to be you've got a broken window, you're fine. Now, broken window doesn't matter that it's conventional. Fix it. I'm trying to think, Matt, you had black stuff in the plastic of the garage that needed to be fixed, even though it's a conventional loan, right? Because it could be mold and that could be a safety issue. Mac and I had to go out and he replaced door handles because there was no way to exit the property in the case of a fire because they had the key was not in the door and the appraiser called that a safety issue. That may sound absurd, but we're starting to see more and more of it. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. Jen, I think about that beautiful property that your buyers bought on Summit Avenue that had fallen on rough times, and they needed smoke detectors in all the different areas. Yes, it was a conventional appraisal, but we wanted to make sure that it still met St. Paul Fire Code, right?
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a deal. It's a conventional loan. They came pre-approved. And because the seller would not reduce the purchase price, we, as part of our inspection contingency, asked them to do several repairs, including like smoke detectors, whatever. So we got all of that listed in the amendment. And then I submitted it to our transaction coordinator, and she, there were like 5 different things. She said, do you not want me to send a copy of this to the lender? If the properties already, we're releasing the contingency, but we have a whole bunch of repairs, is that something that could come back to bite us after? Or should I not send them the list of repairs we're requesting? Is that something that could affect the loan?
Brad, stop laughing.
Did I say something? I'm sorry. Is it a dumb
No,
question?
this is Cassie. Colin, sorry to interrupt. But
No, Cassie, keep going. I would
okay.
love for you to take this one.
Well, technically, and I know why Brad was laughing. He wasn't laughing at you, Jen, but I mean, technically anything that's part of the purchase agreement needs to go to the lender or it's considered mortgage fraud. And you would also be included in that because you are an agent on the file. So anything related to the purchase agreement needs to be sent to the lenders. Now, you'll hear different agents across the board handle this differently and tell you different things. But this is the ultimate answer. I've even had some loan officers say, don't send that to me. And I've had agents call me and say, I know you've always told me, but the loan officer's telling me not to do this. So I mean, follow your loan officer's guidelines. Another point that I wanted to make on this whole thing, though, is to your point, Jen, of you negotiated a lot of this before the appraisal was even done. If it's things that I know are going to be called out on the appraisal based on the knowledge that I have from experience and the stuff that Colin is sharing with us today, in my amendment, I also add additional verbiage that seller to complete repairs prior to appraisal.
Oh.
That way, and then, I can share all of my verbiage with you if you guys need it, but because a lot of times you have marked in the purchase agreement that the buyer would be responsible for the reinspector. At least that's what we were doing in the height of multiple offers and other things, right? Maybe people are doing that differently now. But at the time that we were having the buyer pay for a reinspect, I would, in my amendments, put that the seller would complete all repairs prior to the appraisal. And if they did not, that they would be responsible for the reinspect.
I just want to make it clear that absolutely 100%, I sent the amendment to the lender. Like regardless, I would do that. But I was just wondering if that was something that could become a problem because of the repairs. So yes, absolutely, Cassie. I I always send that. But I just didn't know if that was, why someone would even mention that. That sounds like a problem.
Well, she mentioned that because so many people, and I know you follow things to the T. I know you firsthand do. But a lot of people don't send it for the lender because, to your question of can it become problematic?
Yeah.
Yes, in the sense that if the appraiser doesn't call it out and it goes through underwriting, now the underwriter may want proof of the repairs. Is that fair, Colin, Brad, Matt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. And they can
Thank
get
you.
picky, right? I mean, it's a gray area where they, it's like, hey, we've got an as-is appraisal here. Um, you know, I mean, matter of fact, Jen, if you think about that deal on Summit Ave, that was an as-is appraisal, but the underwriter looked at pictures of the appraisal and said, this is, the appraisal commented this, and this. We want some more detail on this. So even an as-is appraisal in some cases will not absolve you from having to make some repairs. One footnote that I would say, Cassie, I think you answered this beautifully. I have seen agents make a practice of splitting up amendments where anything that affects the purchase price or the seller paid concessions will be on one amendment, and anything revolving repairs will be on a separate amendment. And you send it all to the lender, but that does give the lender some discretion on what they are submitting to underwriting, if you follow me.
Yeah. I've seen that too. And then Jen, I think back to your whole original point is I've seen, and Colin, Matt, and Brad, don't take offense to this, but I've seen underwriters blow some things completely out of proportion, right? Like appraisal aside, I've just had like a negotiation between a buyer and seller, and they were fine with how it was resolved, and underwriting then was like, no, we don't like this. And for example, black stuff, you mentioned that earlier, where it was okay. I think in my particular case, they were having the seller remove a portion of some sheetrock and whatever. Well, that led to underwriting actually wanting a full mold inspection. So why, that's kind of the answer to the why, because underwriting then has a lot of control of how things can proceed, regardless of how buyer and seller negotiated or agreed to it.
So as long as we send it to the lender, we're covered. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to Cassie's point, you should be sending that to the lender just to kind of CYA, if you know what I mean, cover your own self. But then from us, it's to Colin's point of the two separate addendums, we can then go to you know, the actual lending institution and, you know, hey, do you guys care about this? Do you not? What does underwriting want to see? What do they not want to see? So you've kind of covered your own self from a liability standpoint. And then we kind of take it a step further with the lending institution to just make sure that, you know, they're okay with what we submit. And if they do want to see everything, you know, we'd certainly oblige them with that. But otherwise, you know, some of them are just perfectly happy with sort of the path of least resistance and, you know, just seeing anything that changes any terms financially with the contract, if that makes sense. And also, I did have a VA one that just closed yesterday, where the buyers assumed quite a bit of work. They assumed just they put a missing handrail up to the attic in themselves, but then they went and hired out some brickwork and got that all done themselves. And they wrote that into the contract before they even offered it. You know, we spoke to the borrowers. You know, hey, it's a tough market. A lot of sellers prefer to see conventional. You know, here's why, because of stuff getting called out on the order. And they just presented the offer. Hey, anything up to $10,000, you know, the borrowers will assume both financial responsibility and just responsibility of organizing and making sure it gets done. So don't, you know, certainly keep that as an option in your back pocket, especially with veteran buyers. If they are going zero down, you know, a lot of times they have funds set aside to remedy things if they need to. And they're most always willing to do it. You know, it's a great loan, great interest rate. In most cases, they're happy to jump in and help get the deal done for themselves.
But if you go that route, make sure that you're clear with your client that in the event something does fall apart one way or another, they're out money, time, and efforts that they put into the house if it doesn't close.
True. You got to be pretty confident that it's going to get done and not denied.
Right, right. Or I mean, and not even alone, you know, sellers have things happen where they end up canceling a deal last minute. You know, we all know anything can happen in real estate. I'm just wanting to make sure if we go that route from our client's perspective that we're just protecting them, that they know, like if anything were to happen and this doesn't close, you're not reimbursed for these things.
Right. So common repair items for both FHA and conventional, and of course, VA. Exposed wires, roof leaks, broken windows, bars on windows without quick release, handrails on stairs and decks, smoke detectors, one per bedroom, one in the hall outside, each of the bedrooms, and then a one on each level, CO detectors, and then water heater with at least 2 straps. That's for both FHA and conventional. We'll get into more FHA VA related ones in a moment, but again, you know, I have seen more, you know, listing agents ask me like, can I confirm this is a conventional loan? Right? Because they think that appraisers are being picky. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. But at the same time, you know, conventional loans are getting more particular about the 3 S's. Right? All right, what about stuff that's just for FHA and VA? This is a list that we put together. In my opinion, bullet point number 6 is the most common one that we see and have seen consistently over time, which is peeling paint. We've got peeling paint in this area. It needs to be scraped and repainted, and the paint chips need to be picked up. That's important,
I was
right?
just gonna butt in and say that I had a time once where peeling paint was called out. They hired a painter who scraped it, repainted, but left the paint chips in the rock bed, which then led to underwriting requiring us to have a lead-based paint test.
Fun. Awesome, right? I've never heard of a water heater strapped. Is that a building code or where does that come from? Double strapped water heater? Doesn't that mean
Colin, I actually don't think that that applies in Minnesota. That applies to more states where like
okay.
earthquakes and stuff are
Oh,
more
yeah.
prevalent. I
Yeah.
was gonna call that out, but I feel like I'm talking too much.
Yeah. Make sure your water heater's double strapped for all of those earthquakes we have along the Mid-Wacaton fault line there, right? Yeah, you're correct. That's not something that
The wind today makes it feel like we have an earthquake, so it
it's not
applies
getting
today.
into the boiler room though. It's not getting in the utility room. Yeah. Christine, thank you. And Cassie, thank you as well. Right. Um, all right, utilities have to be on and working. This is for you that work bank-owned properties. I mean, this is a big one, right? Okay, we gotta meet them out there. Sometimes I've seen buyer agents. I think about all the deals that Nicole Junker has done for REO, bank-owned properties, right? Okay, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna turn the water on, make sure somebody there is to turn the water on for the appraiser. Appliances have to be installed, working. The heater has to be working and able to heat the home to 58 degrees. Um, the attic inspection. So this is a big one, right? Conventional does not require an attic inspection, but FHA does. A head and shoulders inspection. Is that right, guys? Yeah.
Yes.
And do they cut it open if they have to, right? FHA forces you to get up there. Yeah. Even if it's sealed.
I'm not seeing who's shaking their head, but I thought that the appraiser wasn't allowed any longer to like that could be a reinspect item if it's not accessible. Like for liability reasons, they won't cut it open if it's painted shut.
So I just had this with Jaden about 4 months ago, early summer. We couldn't get the attic was sealed. Appraiser would not cut it. Didn't have a ladder high enough to get into the attic because it was over I think it's 8 feet is the limit that they have a ladder for. I mean, most have higher, but this guy did not. Listing agent couldn't get out there. Jaden couldn't get out there. So I had to drive out there with a ladder to a Lakeville property so the appraiser could get up into the attic. So they do not cut. You do have to unseal it yourself or have the sellers do it.
How much did you charge them? $200 trip fee.
150. I gave him a discount.
All right. So what if you have one of these items that is a common repair? But what happens next, right? The appraiser will identify repairs, sometimes known as work orders, to be completed, right? Um, and then the work is paid for and or completed. And then who pays for the work depends on the purchase agreement, right? These lines 117 and 118 and 119, right? This is where the seller would agree to pay up to a certain amount for repairs that are required by the lender commitment, which to my understanding is the appraisal, right? So Cassie, I mean, if you're writing a VA or an FHA offer, you could slap some dollar figure in 117, 118, 119, depending on what you've seen with your eyes during this
Yep,
showing.
I 100% do. Again, I try to negotiate these things in the front end before we even get to the appraisal point. And this was a lot harder to do the lender commitment work orders, when we were at the height of our multiple offer situation. But I think it's a lot easier now. I usually generally would put 250 to 500 in there, period, because if a lender work order comes back, the seller could just refuse to do it for something as simplistic as a GFCI or smoke detector, and you're losing a deal over $50.
Yep. Yep. And then who pays for the trip fee, which I just joked with Matt about, right? Okay, the appraiser has to go back out there. That is typically 150 to 200 bucks, but that's not free, right? And so it's added to the standard appraisal fee. Let's say your average appraisal fee is 575 and now you got to pay an extra 200 bucks, right? It adds up. But you look at line 126 of the purchase agreement, who decides to pay for the reinspection or final inspection fee is dependent on how the purchase agreement's checked, right? So two big parts that you control in the offer writing process. All right, we'll breeze through this real quickly. This is conditions. So conventional actually has 6 different categories that they will mark in terms of what condition the property is in. C1, which is perfect, C2, which is pretty good, C3, which is good, C4, which is deferred maintenance, physical deterioration, wear and tear. It's been adequately maintained. And then C5 and C6 is where you get into some trouble. C5 is a significant fixer-upper, and C6 is uninhabitable, right? So if you're conventional, by the way, I've had a C6 appraisal that was marked as is, right? So sometimes just because the appraiser isn't calling for any repairs, again, it doesn't mean that you're entirely, good. And that's why we try and wait to tell people, hey, the appraisal is through underwriting, right? Because it's like, hey, the appraiser marked it. Value's good as is. Well, if you do that, like in Jen's case, where I told Jen, like, hey, we should be good. It hasn't gone to underwriting yet, but the value is really solid and the appraiser marked it as is. Well, then you got to come back and say, yeah, but we got to fix this, this, and this, right? An underwriter's review of the appraisal, once that's complete, you're in the clear. Until an underwriter's looked at the appraisal, what the appraiser says matters, but only to a point. It's frustrating, I know, but I would encourage you to say, when you get those messages, appraisal received, great, thank you for updating me. Has the appraisal been reviewed by an underwriter? Two more slides, weather-related escrows, right? So you get into this time of year, you're not going to go out there and scrape paint and then paint in 9-degree weather, right? This is where you could easily hold an escrow through title. All right. Flex Title's really good at this, as they are at just about everything. You could say, hey, chipping and peeling paint needs to be replaced, but obviously we're not going to do that in the middle of December. So we're going to get a bid from a painter for $1,000, and then we're going to escrow 1.5 times that amount. It's going to be held by the seller or the buyer. It's held in an escrow account through title. And then once the work is done, the final inspection occurs. It might be April. Hey, we're done with the painting. Come on out, take a look, and everything's done, right? Anybody, I'm sure you all have dealt with these weather-related escrows. Very common on new construction. That's why you have some gravel driveways that, my driveway's still gravel. It's August, but we didn't escrow. And then lastly, I wanted to share this with you guys. This is a flyer that Caitlin helped us put together, which was taken directly from an FHA appraiser. So an agent on our team had an FHA listing, and they said, hey, I'm coming out to appraise the property. This is what I want to see. Okay. Now, it was in all caps. Appraisers aren't typically the most diplomatic or soft, people. And okay, all caps, holy cow, that can kind of freak you out. But these were answers to the test ahead of time, right? They don't want to have to charge a final inspection fee and go out and drive and make sure, okay, all the work's been done, check, right? And so on the right-hand side in blue here, I would say, all right, as your listing agent, I want to make sure your home is available to all buyers with all loan types, including veterans that have served our country. Let's go through this checklist together and make sure we can confidently market your property as FHA and VA approved. Now, if you're in a $700,000 property, obviously you're probably not going to take an FHA buyer, but you could take VA, right? The point is, in a listing presentation, this is just one more arrow in your quiver where you can say, hey, I want to provide you value to make sure that we're selling your home at the best possible price. And in doing so, I don't want to close off a certain set of buyers because there aren't CO detectors in your basement. right? So a tool that you guys can use when you're going on those listing appointments and just showing off that you are a professional and you understand um, what's needed to cater to appraisers and appraisal guidelines. That's it, everybody. Any questions about anything we covered? Anybody want to add anything?
Good in here.
Yeah, I say one.
One thing here. Hold on, Brad.
I know it's Colin included in one of the earlier slides, but it's always a bit of a tricky conversation in terms of getting the appraisal on your listing, getting the appraiser the comps that you used to price the property. From the feedback we've gotten, some appraisers are like, we love it. Even if they just print out the MLS, leave it on the island in the kitchen or whatever. Any direction that they can give before they work up their appraisal is huge. But again, you guys do sometimes run into, in a more old school appraiser who wants no communication and, wants to do the job himself, which sort of is what it is. You kind of run into people like that in the industry. But I would encourage everyone to find a way that works for them to just try to get any info that you can on how you priced your listing in front of the appraiser. It'll help you quite a bit for sure. And Cassie, I guess I'm curious your opinion on that. You probably have a different angle on it than I probably do.
No, I think you're spot on. We've just always been told that we're not supposed to communicate with the appraisers, right? Well, anyhow. I have had appraisers reach out and ask me. I've left stuff at the house. I've replied to the request for the appraisal, especially if I hate to keep bringing this up because we're not in this market, but maybe it's just me being hopeful that we're going to enter into that market again. With multiple offers, if you had a house that went 25, 35 over, you could support that price with the multitude of offers you had, right? Because the house is only worth what someone's willing to pay, and it helps show and support the appraiser that value. I think also one last thing that I wanted to add is, while a lot of this list is kind of as good as it gets, if you will, in that appraisers do have guidelines. I think Matt and Brad and Colin could agree. What one appraiser is going to call out, the next might not, right? Like I've had things in a house where I'm like, absolutely, this is going to get called out for VA, FHA, or bringing this a step farther for the agents when I'm meeting with sellers and we're talking about what loan types to accept. And I say, per the rules, your deck has peeling paint and probably would never go FHA or a VA. We can take a risk and list it accepting those loan types, knowing that you may need to make this repair in the future if it comes up, or we can just eliminate VA and FHA altogether. So I talk through those things with my sellers. Is GFCI on here within, 6 feet of every water source?
It wasn't on there. I was going to add that as well. But those
Okay.
get called out.
So that is it 6 feet or 3 feet, Matt?
I think it's 3, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it's 3. So, anytime you have a washer and dryer tub, you need a GFCI outlet within 3 feet. Same with your kitchen sink, bathroom outlets, etc. That is a super common one to see called out. But then again, I've seen appraisers miss that. Or I have a property right now that I had to relist last Friday. It was supposed to close Monday, whole other story, but it has peeling paint on the deck. Well, we're not under contract right now, but depending on how much snowfall I have on that deck come the appraisal, I might slide through on that. Depending on the next offer that we accept. So it's really hard, like as much as a baseline as these guys are providing for us, it's not like an end all sale, right? And you're always still going to come across things that you're like, what in the hell is this appraiser thinking? Or on the flip side, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that never got called.
Question here.
Yeah, so tacking on to what you were saying, Brad, about comps. My neighbor's house a couple years ago, they sold it off market for an incredible amount. I was shocked. It's a great comp, but it didn't officially hit the MLS, but it's public information. Sure. How does that play a role? If I'm able to find that, look that up on a tax record, and I still present it to a appraiser? That's a good question.
That's a great question. I believe the appraisers only use MLS, or do they use tax records as well?
Well, I guess my question for you now is, you said this was a couple years ago. Are you still trying to utilize this now because it would be too old? Or are you saying hypothetically, if you would have tried to sell within 30 days of them selling?
Yeah, hypothetically.
So hypothetically, I agree with you guys that I think that they always typically just use whatever's in the MLS, but I have seen them use it as an additional comp. Right? They have to provide 3. Matt, Colin.
Okay.
So I've seen when someone has submitted that and they've used it as a 4th.
When you're doing a consideration of value, then yeah, it's 3. Appraisers use up to like what, 6 comparables, but yeah, I mean, when it comes to reconsideration of value, it's typically 3 that we see.
Well, thanks everybody. Good stuff today. Appreciate it. Any other questions? We are around. Cassie, thank you for being here. We'll see you next week at this time. Hope you guys got something out of this.